All right, let's talk about routing. So, as a just like we talked about routing in single-page applications in the React context, we see that it's quite different how you do routing in a classical web application or web pages, right? Where typically you have an explicit link between pages, where you click on that link and the URL of the browser is changed, and you drop whatever content you had before, and it's replaced by whatever content is referenced by that link. Right? So we already talked about in this idea previously in React that we're not actually going to do that. Right? Instead, we're going to have content be dynamically loaded and replace the DOM at strategic points and decide what content wants to be displayed in what place programmatically. Right? So instead of replacing the entire document, we have small snippets and components that are loaded strategically to give the illusion or to give the use case of being able to implement navigation. Right? So we're not using the classical mechanism of replacing entire web pages with other web pages to implement the classical way of navigation. Instead, what we do is that we use the same URL mechanism, but it's going to be mapped to certain components that get loaded and displayed at strategic programmatically whenever we particularly want. So we already have an application, so we're not going to do that. Instead, let's play around with routing from the application that we already have. And we're going to use as an example, something that we could perhaps use in our application. For instance, being able to navigate between a login, a registration, and a profile page, right? And perhaps also to our list of courses, right? So let's do that. Let's create several components, right? Like a login component, a registration component, a profile component, and navigate between them. All right, so let's, if we go to the top, let's create a couple components here. So ng generate a component for login. Let's generate another one for register, and another one for profile. And we would like to be able to navigate between these three. Right? So if we go into our IDE, we'll see that we have those components built for us. There they are. So we have login, profile, and register. Let's modify them so that we can distinguish them. So let's change some. Let's close this first. Close all. Let's open up login, and let's just have here H1 login. Let's in profile, we'll say H1 profile, and in register, we'll say here H1 register. Okay. All right, excellent. So let's also start. Let's see. Do we want? Let's also create a home page, right? A landing page, and from that landing page, perhaps being able to navigate to different parts of the application. So let's also create a home page. So ng generate home, and from this home, let's see, where's this home? We'd like to have maybe links that would allow us to navigate from one component to the next. Right? So let's have here H1 home. So this will be our starting point, and in our default here login, our root component, we're going to load our home component. Homes. Home. There we go. Oh, Command S, not S. All right, excellent. So we would like to have links that will allow us to navigate to each one. So something like href and navigate to login, right? And to register and to my profile. Now, typically what we would do is link to the HTML page that goes there directly, right? That's not what we're going to do. Right? Instead, we're gonna use a modern way of navigating between these, and let's see how we implement that. Right? All right. So by default, routing is not. We need to set it up, right? And it's implemented through the use of a couple of modules or libraries that support routing. So routing is already installed. We don't have to install any new packages, but we need to import them, right? Whenever we need it to implement routing. So what we're going to do is that in a separate file, right, in a routing file, we're going to declare what is the logic of navigation between the different components. Right? Very much like you would do in React, you would declare your routes, right, and you would declare the paths, saying that this particular path renders this component and whatnot. Yes, very similar. This is part of a strategy where you want to decouple, right, the logic of or you want to modularize, or you want to centralize the configuration of your navigation. Right? And what you want to try and do is avoid spreading the logic of navigation across multiple artifacts. So if you imagine the way you did this before single-page applications, the navigation the logic was spread over multiple pages. Each page specifically knew what link referred to what other page, right? So the logic of your navigation was never in one single place. Right? If you had 100 pages, your logic was spread over 100 pages. Right? You had to specifically go to a page to know where would that page go for those 3 or 4 links in that page. If you want to modify them or update them or maintain them, you had to go to that one page and update those 3 or 4 links. Right? Or if you wanted to change the navigation from some other page, you had to go and modify in that particular page. This is a nightmare, right? This is an administration nightmare, right? It's like a go-to, right? You can, from anywhere you can jump anywhere, right? That's why we stopped using go-tos, right? It's very hard to maintain, very hard to debug. So instead, we changed that strategy to have instead a centralized place where we could have a single place of maintenance, where we can maintain this spaghetti code and have it in one single place, and say, okay, well, these are all our routes, right? These are all our possible paths, with parameters and everything, right? And this is where they should go. So if you're here and this happens, this is where you go. Somewhere like you would have maybe a state machine, right, where it will allow you to, in a single place, design your state machine that will allow you to navigate from one page to the next. Make sense? So in that sense, or following that strategy, we're going to declare a single point of maintenance that is going to have the responsibility of having this logic, this navigation logic. All right. So we're going to have it in a page in a file called app.routing. Okay? You can call it whatever you want, right? But it's a very common name. And in here, we're going to get started by importing the routing modules, which is going to allow us to implement the routing logic. Okay? We're going to load any components that we want to navigate to. We're going to load them. Let's start with login. Right? So that's the login component we just generated a minute ago. All right, there it is. And here's where we're going to declare all our routes. Right? It's going to be an array of routes. That's going to be a map. It's going to map what path is refers to what component. This is identical to what you would do in React when you declare a route. But in React, you do it with a tag. You use a route tag, you say a path, and then you list a component. Yes? So this is similar. But instead of doing it in using tags, you use JavaScript to do that. Okay? Okay, so right now we only have one path, which is login. We want more, we can declare the profile, the register. We would also declare them here. But for now, let's keep it simple. Let's just have this one path. And we're going to export. Oops. We're going to export routing router module.forRoute app routes. So routes will be the root of our routes. Now you can have nested routes. You can nested routes. So routes within routes, and which is pretty cool. And so you can have like a state machine containing another, each state having an embedded state machine, right? So it's pretty cool. You can have all this nesting, which is pretty powerful. All right, excellent. So we declare that. So now that we have our routes declared, we need to instantiate them and make them available throughout the application, right? So to do that, in the app modules, remember, app modules is where we do all our configuration, right? So in our app modules, we're going to import our routing file, which we just created. And where? In app modules, there it is. We're going to load it. There it is. We loaded our routing. And we're going to import it in our imports. Import. Now, we already have browser module. We just did forms module before. We're going to declare our routing. Okay. And finally, we need to tell our application where do we want to render all these snippets of HTML that we have going around, right? All these components, all these login components and register component. Where do you want to render them? Do you want to render them as sub-elements? Or do you want them to take over the entire page? What do you want to do? Right? So let's start by first rendering them as sub-components, right? Sub-elements. So what we can do here in the home page, where is it? Here, we can say where do we want things rendered, right? And that's what a router outlet is. It says all those login components and HTML that right now they're just H1s, right? Here's where I wanted to render them, right? Very much like a route in React, right? The component will render where the route is declared, right? If a particular link is giving a particular value, right? So here's where the link occurs. Instead of href equal, we use the router link. So router link is very similar to what React has as a link. Right? React uses link, and Angular is an attribute, which is called router link. Okay? And this path maps to the routes here. All right, so these here, these are logical names. These are tokens. These are not URLs. Right? These are tokens that map to this map here, right? And the logic is that the content of that component will get rendered in the router outlet. Okay? All right? All right, so let's try it out. If we go here and we go there, let's refresh. So we click on login, notice that it renders the login. Right? It wasn't there. Notice the login, right? So if I remove that, notice it's gone. Right? But when I click on login, it adds the /login, and it renders the page with the router outlet, whatever the content of that component. Make sense? All right, let's do the other ones real quick. So for instance, in routing, we can declare the other components. We can say that if instead we have the path is register, I want to render the register component. There it is. Or if I see profile, I want the profile component. There it is. I'm going to ignore the quotes. And if we go here and we change these router links to use those routes we just declared, and use here register, and profile. Right now, I can navigate to profile, register, login, and I can even type it here. If I type here profile, right, it loads the profile content, or here if I click on it. Make sense? Right? So the only thing that perhaps we might want to add to this is that instead of having an embedded component, that instead it would be the component would take up the entire page, perhaps. Right? But it would be identical. The idea would be identical. The concept is the same. All right? So let's take a look at doing that. So yeah, so we did register and profile, and we were displaying them in the router. Okay? We did that already. Oh, okay. So let's now expand on the idea of having login and register and profile actually having some content in there. Like for instance, having input fields for username and password and buttons. Right? We'd like to be able to explore the idea that if I click on the login page, it should navigate me to the profile page. Things like that. Right? So let's take a look at that next.